No, I didn't pick it. But, well, actually, there's a little story when I and this Cash Pilatowski, just down the road from here, we had our physicals in Hartford. At the end of the day, the commanding officer and there came out and he says that he named off. He said, "You 6 men I want you in the other room." So we all went in there, and he says, for this day, he says, 2 of you, they have to meet the quota for the Navy, and 2 of you are going to go into the Navy whether we like it or not. So he says, do I have any volunteers? And one guy, in about a half minute, so he volunteered, and then he said, well, any others? So nobody said anything. So he said, whoever I say is going to go in, and he didn't point at Cash Pilatowski and me, so somebody else went in. So that was a little story. Just going into the service. I could have wound up in the Navy, and so.
Did you prefer being in the Army anyway?
Yeah, I was going to E.C. Goodwin Tech as an auto mechanic technician, and I spent 2 years there already, and I probably got a deferment for 6 months. I actually had almost a year to go, but the superintendent at the school, Mr. Wilbur, said if you get a 6-month deferment, I'd finish my schooling completely and I'd be right in line to go now. But I didn't get the deferment. Well, the way it worked out, I just went right in, and I was like under the impression I could maybe get into like the Air Corps ground crew for one. So I actually wrote to Air Base on Long Island, I guess it was, and said all my my resume credentials, and but they didn't I didn't have the experience, so I just flatly said I just wound up, and everything moved so fast anyway.
Well, what was that like for you, those first few days of being inducted into the Army?
Well, yeah, it was. I didn't mind, but everything was laid out in the law. I remember we had a few meetings after supper, and they just laid on if you don't pay, you're going right into the brig or stuff. And so I'm 18 years old. I just turned 18, so I was just a kid. So actually,
So where did you go for your first stop in the Army?
Well, I went to Fort Devens. That's the center that and then from there we went by train down to Camp Blanding, Florida. That's where I took the basic training.
And what was basic training like? What kinds of things were you doing there?
It was getting you in shape, I guess, and whatever, and orienting you. Well, that was very important to me, because I picked up a lot of little tips. That's why I'm here. If I wouldn't have paid attention and stuff like that,
What kinds of tips?
Well, just to whatever, to how to, when you're supposed to not crawl instead of being running around, and stuff, and just little odds, and where to such, so your shelter would like that, whatever, things like that.
Keeping yourself safe while you're in battle,
and why? Yeah, just a little. You get out of the thing, I can tell you, what things that. It's just
Do you remember any of your instructors during boot camp?
The only one. Well, see, when I went in, they had just formed, I have literature, the 66th Black Panther Infantry Division. It was just organized. And if you want to get into that later, Christmas Eve in 1944, that my old outfit, well, I was taken out of the 66 as a replacement to go to the 3rd. Well, Christmas Eve in 1944, that 66 division was, my whole outfit was going across the English Channel with the, on the one of the ships was a Leopoldville. There was a convoy and others. And come to find out, they said this brand new German submarine torpedo, that Leopoldville, 804 fellows got killed, drowned, killed, and about 1,500 got wounded. You know, my old outfit, which that's. But the only one that I can really stood out was Lieutenant Cochran. My old outfit stood out.
What was it about Lieutenant Cochran that was outstanding? Was it good or bad?
It was good for us. No, not running on officers and stuff. But well, after basic, well, you know, we took our basic training, and from April till around August, the 1st of August, just give or take a few days or whatever. And we wound up in Camp Robinson, Arkansas, and so we were just more or less coasting along there because we had the basic training and stuff, and whatever was going to happen. To me, that's the impression I had. You know, we had, you know, and so we had the morning reveille. You know, you get up and stuff, and then right after that, it was a routine thing that would police up the area and stuff like, you know, everybody ship shape, you know, for the day. So this one day, this Lieutenant Cochran, he looked and there was a lot of trash and stuff around the place, and the guys didn't respond to it. So he says, "Okay, you guys, you men, I want you to crawl and pick up all this stuff. I want you to get crawling around and pick up all this stuff." And what the heck happens a few minutes later? Who the heck walks around? It's a major, our battalion commander comes around the corner, and he sees what's going on. We're crawling around. We didn't know. He said, like in the service, they say crawl, you crawl, you know, or else, you know, you get it, you know. So we're crawling around out there, and the major comes around, and he looks at Lieutenant Cochran and says, "What's going on here?" He says, "Don't let me ever catch you doing that to my men," he says, anymore. He really threw it right in front of us, you know. And then he walked away. that was, so we just kind of, "Oh boy, you got it." Yeah.
So where did you go after you left Arkansas?
Well, that's when I was in the second batch that they took out of our. Kept taking out of our, I don't know if there's how many more batches, but I was in the second batch that they called us to move up, you know. Then they said, "Well, you're getting on, you know, the train," I guess it was. We went to Fort Meade, Maryland, and then it was, you know, the staging here to go down to the Virginia. No, it's Norfolk, out of Virginia. Where we got on the ship. They said there was 5,000 of us, and it was an English ship.
Do you remember the name of the ship?
No, I don't remember. They never did give any names. There again, you know, you did your thing, and you just moved along, you know. So yeah. So it was about 8 days or so. We landed in Casablanca, North Africa. And from there we went on those little trains. They call them 48/8s, like 40 men or 8 or something like that. And so we went across the desert all the way to Oran on the train. And then from there they put us on a boat to Naples, Italy.
And what was that like, being in North Africa, even only for that short time?
Yeah, it was real hot, and we went across the desert, so it was a mess. One thing we had a couple of days in Casablanca before we got the train, and so that I had a pass to go to Casablanca, so I walked down in there, and on the street, and you could see the men riding these little donkeys, like, and a woman carrying this stuff on top of her head. It was kind of, it was different from me, 18 years old, and
Sure.
stuff. But the thing that caught me there was that they had all the food, and like the meat and stuff like that, and it was loaded with flies. When I saw that, oof, I just turned around. That was enough. That turned me off about going in doing any more. So. But
So the ship across to Naples, how long did that take to sail across?
I don't. That was just a very short trip across the Mediterranean. It was too, and then they put us in a convoy on trucks to go up to what turned out to be my company, the company 30th Infantry Regiment. And while I was on the truck, I was up on the front part, and on the back part, Ponsonby, we all had gas masks. For some reason, they made us carry the gas masks, which we never had them anymore. We got up to the, when I got up to the Alpha, we never used it. But we had gas masks, and I just looking around, you're sitting there, you're halfway around the room almost, and going up, and I see this name on this gas mask, and it was Burby. So oh my gosh, Eddie Burby. We were altar boys in St. Patrick's in Collinsville,
Wow.
So I go over and look, and he looked at me. Oh my gosh! And we hugged him. Oh, it was really, it was fate, Here we were both, just kids, And then let's say 5-10 minutes later, and all of a sudden we hear planes. A couple of planes are coming over, and they stopped the trucks immediately. We hopped out and hid behind. Tried to get some cover. I know the olive trees, there's some small trees on the side, so I hopped behind there, he and I, and they strafed us. They came real low. You could hear as the bullets were hitting the ground. It was like rain coming on, and stuff. And so that was our, like I always say, that was our christening. That was our first taste of the war. He and I both hugging each other right there underneath the tree. And it was. So then we got up to. After that, after we got off the truck, he wound up in Company D, come to find out. He survived the war. He was in a heavy weapons company. But I never saw him any more contact with him until after the war. But we got up to the supposed where my company was going to be, and it was a huge 2-story house, and it was raining. I remember it was raining lightly out, and it was in that part of the country there. They got a lot of rain instead of snow, and it was just a muddy mess, of anywhere from your ankles all the way to your knees or something. This place is so. We got there, and the first sergeant comes out, and he gives a lowdown. He says, you're now in Company 30th Infantry Regiment. And he turned around and back in the house. That was it for us. There was no supper and nothing. I know if they threw a can of beans or so. So I was so doggone exhausted by then, and and stuff, and it was raining and muddy, and there was no place to, and so more or less they figured, well, you might as well start right now. You're going to be on you're going to be on the boondocks anyway, whatever, So you get used to it. So that was it. I curled up somewhere around there. I remember now, and fell asleep, I guess.
What time of year was that? Was it spring or?
No, this had to be around in December.
December.
Because I went over it in October, I'd say around the 1st of December.
And you were private at that time?
Yes, I think I was a private. Then I became a PFC a little later on. The sergeant.
Okay, so what was your job assignment within the company?
Well, see that I was my thing was I was trained with the M1 rifle as a rifleman. But when I got up there, well then the platoon leader, I think he came over to me and he flipped me over a 03 rifle. That's the old World War I rifles. And at that time, I think later on they maybe had, but at that time they only had what they called the launcher, the thing that you inserted on the rifle, so you can shoot rifle grenades, anti-tank grenades.
Mm-hmm.
So he flipped me the rifle. He says, "You are now the rifle, the rocket rifle man." I said, "Yeah." So okay. So he says.
Did you ever have any training in it?
No, but he says we're going to take you out on the range. I knew it was that day or the next day. He said, and we're going on the range. So okay, we go on the range, and you and me, what the heck, I was a kid and didn't know any better and whatever, and so they gave me the rockets and to shoot, so they're probably snickering up their sleeve, and so I stood up and I shot one of those. I think I went back further than the rocket did. And I paid though. My doggone whole shoulder was black and blue. I never did that again. That was once and for all. And I shot loads of them after that, but it was either the kneeling or prone. Flat on the So I learned that lesson. So
it's a painful way to have to learn.
Yeah, and we carried. I had to carry around a dozen of those around my belt, and those go off with contacts. So actually, I wasn't walking. You never know. If I went down too fast and hit something solid, I wouldn't have been here. It just I think that's what happened.
It's kind of tough if you have to duck.
Yeah, thank God, and I never had to do that fast.
So where did you go next?
Yeah, well, we were taking the outfit. They had evidently they pulled back from the casino front, the 3rd Division, my outfit, and then I think they're earmarking us to maybe go back up to the casino front again, because we're taking these big rubber boats, that inflated rubber boat, things like. Mm-hmm. We're taking those for a couple of days, the training with on those boats. I know what river that was, a little river, and then all of a sudden they changed the orders or whatever. They packed us all up, shipped us all down to just outside of Naples, and we were in pup tents down there. I remember having my little pup tent, And then we start taking amphibious training to on the LSTs, or landing ship tanks, and that went on for maybe a couple of weeks. That turned out till just about to January 19th, when the actual landing was on Anzio.
So you were involved in the landing at Anzio?
Yes, yes. But
what was that like?
Yeah, well, that was a little thing too. That well, on the LSTs they have suspended these. They have these large boats. They hold about 50, 60, like they would say about a platoon, about 60 guys in one boat. Well, our boat, evidently, they got us far to land the LSTs, and we got us off the boat, and then they went with the doggone engine motor wouldn't start on our boat. So we got stranded there, and the rest of our company outfit came in to shore. So we got in at daybreak after. Remember, it was they got the engine going after, and they got us in. And I remember getting off the little boat there, and by then there wasn't much of any firing right then, but we get in about a few hundred yards or so, 400 yards maybe, and hear this plane over to the side, and I see this little black thing that was up there, you know. Turned out to be a bomb. And in the meantime, this LST had pulled it as far as it could to shore. That's where they do until they come to the beach, and then they have the whole front of the ship comes down, and it's a ramp so for the tanks or trucks or anything you want to unload. So here this truck was coming about halfway down the ramp. It was a bomb. It directly hit the whole front of that ship. And I looked at just the corner of my eye, and it's that truck was just like a matchbox. The guy that was driving it, he was gone. So they just, and luckily the shrapnel and stuff didn't reach us, but it threw me off off the ground, blew off the ground and stuff, concussion and stuff. So I figured, well, this is it. This is war. You know, that was it. So then we went up. Too far. We caught up with our company. I remember catch company, and I was on the right hand side of the road, and it was little houses that the Italian people had, nice little houses with plank and stuff. And I remember the men out come running out there, and they're howling, Tedeschi, you know, like pulling up the road, like you know, the Germans are the enemy, you know. And so this is what this fella in my squad there, Zimmer Hazel, I remember his name. He buddied up with me. So we both practically crawled across the road, and we went over to the other side. But what those Italian guys are waving, come on over, you know. So they're so doggone happy to see us and stuff like that, the Americans, you know. And so come on in, you know, open up the door, come on in the house, you can mangia, you know, they got food for us, and I'm looking there, the whole place was just spread with, and the women were there over there, all so happy to see us. And I'd say, oh my God, you know, here, they were, you know, the Italians were enemies with us, you know.
Sure.
You know, stuff in Germany, so, and they're so happy to see the Americans. Boy, that was a big morale builder right there. I said, hey boy, you know, we're gonna roll up our sleeves now, you know. So we kind of, you know, we didn't want to, because, you know, we're in a war, you know. We gotta sit down and eat, you know. So then we says no. We kind of, you know, brushed off. So I remember one of them says, Vino, he said, come on down. He said, you got to come on downstairs, down in the cellar. They got wine, you know, barrels of wine. So we went down out there and looked. Oh my God, yeah, they did have barrels of wine out there, but no, we didn't. But you know, I always wondered what happened to those poor people there, though, because after that, all hell broke loose. All hell broke loose. It wasn't only just the small arms, you know, the burp guns and machine guns of the Germans, but the 88s and all that stuff come flying at you. You know, you hear the things coming over your head. When you hear them hard, you know the damn things were going over you. But there was, you got used to it. But when it went like a suction thing, you better start taking cover and crawling. Just hope to God it doesn't hit you directly, because that baby's coming right in at you, you know. So that's how you learn quick, you know. So that was. After that, I lost contact too with my friend there, Zimmer Hazel. I always wondered what happened to him too. If he ever made it, or if he got nailed just that day, or, you know. But, and it was a complete chaos after the rest after that. Just that night he had us, our lieutenant had us shipped around at least 4 or 5 times through the night. Every time he kind of wanted to get some rest, you know, we got to move out, you know, because they got the orders, I guess, of what was going on. We didn't realize, but what they were doing. But, you know, all you could see is these the poor towns. They had their haystacks, and they were all burning from the, you know, the shells hitting them and stuff like that. It was you name it. It was really going on. Yeah, it was real. So, but then it settled down, and, you know, after that kind of settled down. When we, you know, there was always a little sporadic fire and stuff like that, and you know, shell coming on and stuff like that.
Where were you when you got the citation for bravery? Yeah,
well, that's it. Like I say, we kind of coasted. I'd say, you know, you get harassed and stuff like that. But I remember, you know, putting up trying to put up barbed wire and stuff like that. That, you know, for us and things, and helping out and stuff, volunteering with certain things for defense and stuff. But that wound up to about almost about a month, because about the 18th of 17th, 18th of February.
You were just fighting in that area, trying to break out of there. Is that what was happening?
Yeah, I think there were. It was the 19th of February that we. They started out in the morning. You knew, like they put up a smoke screens, you know, with bombs, you know, that smoke bombs, and we knew we came down to this where come to find out right where the Germans were entrenched, like, and with machine guns to fortify their mortars and stuff. And they had it. I remember they had it strung with the barbed wire. And the guys, they were, again, they didn't pay attention to stuff. Just walking around there, you had no, the ones that just stood up and try to get through the barbed wire, just standing up and stuff like that, they just tore right in two with them, because the machine were set right through evidently, I think, you know. So I crawled underneath the barbed wire to get out, you know, to get through, and made it, you know. But so and we were pinned down there for.
This might be a good time for me to read the citation for the award of the Distinguished Service Cross. John A. Kostrisak, Sergeant, then Private First Class, Infantry Company E, 30th Infantry Regiment, for extraordinary heroism in action. At 0800 hours on 18 February 1944, near Paglione, Italy, during a task force thrust against the exposed flanks of an enemy salient which had penetrated deep into the perimeter of the Anzio beachhead, Sergeant Kostrisak braved the intense fire of an enemy stronghold in order to destroy an enemy machine gun. When his company was halted on bare, level ground by intense fire from an enemy-held position, Sergeant Kostrisak took his rifle and grenade launcher and rushed 125 yards toward the defilated enemy. Dropping to one knee, he fired 3 grenades into the machine gun nest, silencing the gun and wounding the 2-man crew. This single-handed assault stunned the supporting enemy rifle elements, who promptly surrendered. The advance was resumed, but the company was again stopped under similar conditions by a far larger enemy force consisting of a heavy machine gun and numerous riflemen, while the remainder of his squad hugged the ground in an unsuccessful effort to escape the lethal hostile fire. Sergeant Kostrisak, unmindful of the bullets which barely missed him, rose to a kneeling position and fired rifle grenades into the defilated strongpoint. After he had killed 4 Germans and knocked out the heavy machine gun, 24 enemy infantrymen surrendered. At about noon, when his company advanced towards a fringe of woods, it was subjected to a heavy artillery concentration and direct fire from the 77mm gun and machine guns of a Mark IV tank. Although his company commander was killed and others fell dead and wounded around him, Sergeant Kostrisak rushed forward 300 yards in a one-man assault on the tank. Scoring 2 direct hits on the armored vehicle, he forced it to limp into the woods, where the crew abandoned it. Displaying an audacity and scorn of danger seldom surpassed, Sergeant Kostrisak had made 3 single-handed assaults on strong enemy forces. He had defeated each of these forces, killing 4, wounding at least 2, and causing the capture of 30 of the enemy. He had prevented his company, which suffered 93 casualties that day, from being completely decimated, and had 3 times enabled it to resume its advance on its objective. Entered military service from Collinsville, Connecticut. That's quite a story.
It was for today.
Is there anything else you want to say about that particular incident?
No, that was...
that pretty much covers it for you.
Pretty much, yeah. It was like that, yeah.
Now, you were wounded during the war.
Yeah, I was wounded right after that.
Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, then we were on another attack, and pinned down, like I said, and stuff, and I can remember the squad leader next to me, he got up to one day and he got hit by a sniper, and then we after lying there for it seemed like ages, because we were really pinned down. If you just moved a little bit, they'd knock you off like that. His name was Gramsci. That's that corporal. So finally, the things slowed down a little bit, and there was like the shoulder, say shoulder a bed along the road. That we moved over into that, and then they start throwing some real heavy stuff at us. I don't know if it was mortars or whatever. And that's when I got hit. It was, we were running up there, and that one shell, they got me, but they got the guy, a couple of guys in front of me, they just tore them right apart. They were just completely done. So
Then how were you wounded? How badly were you wounded?
yeah, that was it. I got hit on the side, my shoulder and stuff, and I was saving my canteen of water. You know, you carry a canteen of water on your belt. I figured, well, I'll just save it till when I need some water. So just about then, I needed some water. So I reached out there. The canteen was completely, that part was just right there too. It just the shrapnel just tore it. There was nothing left of the canteen. In other words, if that canteen wasn't there, I'd had a lot more sustained, a lot more wounds. But let's say some wounds. So I really got hit on my shoulder. My arm is never the same. My shoulder. So when they got to the evacuation, they got me to the evacuation. The guys coming, they have guys at the back, the guys in the back, they come in and they're following through, I guess. They got me to the evacuation hospital, and then from there I went to into Naples, at the general hospital here. I remember I was on the second floor there, and just at that time, it was in March of 44, Mount Vesuvius erupted.
Oh wow!
Yes. So right from my I had a nice beautiful picture one day, you know, from where I was laying there, and I could see it at night how the lava was erupting, you know, the big veins of lava coming down. You know, that Pompeii years ago was completely covered. So this just happened that it was erupting then. So during the day it was completely with the smoke and stuff. You can see, you know, like really dense. But at night it was really clear, you know. Vesuvius. And then about 2 weeks after I was in there, I was recuperating from the wounds and stuff. We got bombed. The hospital got bombed because we lost our they said that the furnace, the boiler room and stuff got bombed. I know that we heard them, the bombs, you know, coming and stuff. We don't know exactly where. That's what actually happened. They actually bombed the hospital. I know that night was that it, you know, whatever. So how that thing.
So did you have to be evacuated from the hospital too?
No, it wasn't enough to be evacuated, but it was. We lost the. We only had cold water, and there was, you know, cold. Luckily, you know, it's not that freezing down there anyway, so we could bear with it, you know. So then I got out of there and joined the outfit again. And that was that had to be in April. The end of April, like. And they set us up. You know, they had to pull back my outfit and reset, set us up, and then that was going to be the breakthrough. What turned out to be the breakthrough of Angel, where they had it the way I understood what they were saying, and how it was going to function was, in our battalion you have the E, F, and G, Easy, Fox, and George, you know, rifle companies, and H was a heavy weapon. So they said that George is going to go first, go as far as he can. And then Denmark's. It was unbelievable. We got through it. Got through the after, but going through the all your buddies, you know.
So were many of your company killed?
So we finally got through George Company, and that company were completely not annihilated us, just about, you know, things. And we got to this opening there, and come to find out that's where they were set up, the Germans. I call them enemies, not Germans, because we get into that. So come to find out they had big trenches in the back part of the field as you come in there, and then on the sides they had some foxholes and stuff. And so we got to that opening, and it was either us or them. So, you know, so we got the orders. So we all made a line, and this was it. We're going right at them, both of us. But well, we didn't kill all of them. They surrendered after. We just overran them because, you know, between us shooting and then we overran them. So that was the end of that part of it right then. So it was a little hill on a knoll on the side. I saw a fox like that, you know, foxholes they had there. So I hopped into that. And that was the only time we ever cried. It was so I was crying. And the lieutenant come crawling over to me, and he says, go on back. He says, go on, you're going back, you know. So I said, no. So then I saw the trenches on the road to get more cover, because I figured that, well, this is going to, I could just sense it, something's going to happen, you know, because that's not the end of it, you know. We got the initial forces, the machine guns and mortars that were right there that were supposedly holding the line, but they had their big stuff in the back, you know. So I hopped out of the foxhole after that, and jumped from the trenches. So I figured, hey, it's coming from that end there of were right up against the trench. There again, just pure instinct and whatever you think about, you know, what you're trained about to do, you know, circumstances. So I hopped up against the thing there, the trenches, and really buried myself as much as I could, and the stuff coming, it was coming in. And I turned around, and the guys that were on the other end of the trench, they were gone. So it just, luckily I survived that. That it cooled off, and I hopped out and get the heck out of that area to try to go. And then we reorganized and stuff. And that day there too, I don't know, they said at the end of the day there was only about 20-25 of us left on the company.
Wow.
The whole company, the rest were. Yeah, that was actually the when we went into Rome. That's just about when they had the Normandy landing up in northern France, and we got into Rome without any resistance in there. They seemed to bypass that and everything. But I and one of the other fellows in the office were designated to ride in a Jeep. The Jeep driver, 3 of us, in an open Jeep, and we could have been hit by snipers or anything. We were just a sitting duck there anyway, you know. But we patrolled Rome. I could remember going down into St. Peter, right to St. Peter's Square, but naturally the Vatican was off. That thing, you know, they had it blocked off, and so. But I can remember that was a big thing for me, to see that. But gosh, you know.
Get to see the Colosseum, all the sights and Rome.
Yeah. So, you know, so we were there for a few days at least, so it's not more than a week. And then we pulled back, say just about the exact spot where I had my pup tent before for amphibious training again.
Huh.
And but this time we're taking training for LCIs. That's the landing craft infantry, they call it. They held about, I don't know, about 300 guys or something, like 300 guys. And that was until, I guess it was August that we went into southern France. And going into there, it was you didn't, the LCIs, they're a ship that went as far as they could up against the beach, and then they had the catwalk, you could say, on each side, and then the stairs where you walked up into what was any water. And you didn't know because, you know, naturally the beaches aren't all manicured, you know, so
Sure.
you could be maybe about a little over your ankles, so over your head.
Uh-huh.
You know? So that's a chance you took, you know. So I know some of the guys got drowned or not on that, you know. But luckily I got off of there all right, and I could remember it was a complete, the noise was unbelievable. I thought the earth was going to split in two. It was between the bombs, their bombing. They had these, the Navy had these rocket boats, I guess they're called. that were shooting, anywhere from about 20, maybe about 30 to 50 rockets at a time or more. I don't know. They're coming overhead. There was several of those that, between those coming in, and the bombs, and whatever, all the other stuff going on, it was, and the trees that were all burning there and everything, it was a complete chaos, coming in, but we didn't have any on our part, what we came, we didn't have much of any resistance at all, right on the beach. But after we got off and organized, and we went up, and they had paved roads and fence that was like here, We got on the road, and we let's say about a half an hour up on our road. We came around this bend and on a big straightaway, and come to find out, over to the left there was a little hill there, and that's where they were entrenched. The Germans were just waiting for us to come around, and as we got enough guys in there, supposedly, I guess, and they really let us have it, all of a sudden, it just, all hell broke loose, and I couldn't remember, just went over the shoulder, and then I looked, I saw that it was a little too far for me to really get to the, like, to where it's coming, their dugouts there. But I did the best I could, and I shot several grenades. I saw when they exploded. They were about 3/4 of the way up, but it was enough to kind of harass them, let them know that. And then I heard some tanks came around. A couple of tanks came around the corner. And they plastered the heck out of that hill there. And what was left there, there was about, I'd say about 8 or 10 Germans, enemy come down with white handkerchiefs and comrade, that was the end of that thing. But in the meantime, though, as they were firing their evidently mortars, and every time a mortar would hit, you could hear some of the medics or whatever, screaming and stuff like that. They were actually hitting us, But luckily, it didn't get me. I survived that. So we from there we just went. There wasn't much real resistance after that. So we're going as fast as we could, march, between marching, and then they'd give us a break and throw us on the trucks, and then we'd go a little bit, then drop off, get the others a break. But they had a system, I guess, of getting us going through. So that was the figure that night, and that I didn't sleep. We didn't sleep. The next day we were doing this, going as fast as we could, and that night, and then we're 2 days left, and that we're going to the third night that we haven't slept or anything, and just going as much as we could.
Wow.
And we're right outside of Brignoles, France. It's a good sized town, or a small city, I'd say. And we're on the outskirts of it, and so we got orders that 2 guys, we set a line outside of so we could try to get some sleep, because we're completely exhausted. 2 guys sleep and 1 guy watch. I can remember doing my part. But then it was my turn to sleep. I was sleeping, and the thing that saved me that day was as dark as the ace of spades out. You know, all of a sudden I hear somebody tripped over me. He was an enemy soldier, German soldier. He's kind of swearing in German. And so I jumped and stuff, and he was more scared than I guess, because you know what the heck he tripped on, you know. And so everything just blew up, the whole, because you know it wasn't only he tripped on me, but others that did the same thing, and holy cow, it was a real war then, you know, for a little while, and so next thing is daybreak, and we so I can remember standing on the side of the road there, and there was at least a couple hundred Germans that we captured then. It must have been a whole company, or at least or maybe a battalion that would come down through, you know.
So they were trying to get out?
No, that we actually captured, that they just gave up though, because like I say, we were, you know, we were right in combat with them, but it was pitch dark then, you know, you couldn't even see what you're doing, what was going on. Everybody was confused, it was complete mess, but I could remember that distinctly, that well, I say enemy, you know, enemy soldier tripped over me, you know. That's what saved me that day. And so after that, we organized and we went into Big Nose and did the street fighting. We were going into, I can remember going into it was kind of, it was this garage there in Big Nose, and I was amazed that, you know, they had all machinery, like a machine shop and everything in the garage, you know, like, and that was in my field. I was studying to be an auto technician and stuff, you know, so.
You wanted to check out the garage.
Yeah, check out the garage. Yeah, see, that was interesting. See, yeah, so see that was one point in Big Nose, I can remember. So we cleaned out of there, and then. And then we went up to, we wound up that part of the country there, they got a lot of rain instead of snow, and it was just a muddy mess, you know, of anywhere from your ankles all the way to your knees or something. This places. So we got there, and the first sergeant comes out, and he gives the lowdown. He says, you know, you're now in company 30th Infantry Regiment, and he turned around and back in the house. That was it for us. There was no supper and nothing. You just, I know if they threw a can of beans or something to us, but so I was so doggone exhausted by then, and you know, and stuff, and it was raining and muddy, and there was no place to, you know, and so more or less they figured, well, you might as well start right now. You're going to be on you know, you're going to be on the boondocks anyway, you know, whatever, you know. So you get used to it. So that was it. I curled up somewhere around there. I remember now, and fell asleep, I guess.
What time of year was that? Was it spring or?
No, this was this had to be around in December.
December.
Because I don't know in October, but you know, I'd say around the 1st of December.
And you were a private at that time?
Yes, I think I was a private. Then I became a PFC a little later on. And got the sergeant.
Okay, so what was your job assignment within the company?
Well, see, that I was my thing was I was trained with the M1 rifle as a rifleman. But when I got up there, well then the platoon leader, I think, he came over to me and he flipped me over a .03 rifle. That's the old World War I rifles. And at that time, I think later on they maybe had, but at that time, they only had what they called the launcher, the thing that you inserted on the rifle, so you can shoot rifle grenades, anti-tank grenades.
Mm-hmm.
So he flipped me the rifle. He says, "You are now the rifle, the rocket rifle man." I said, "Yeah." So okay. So he says.
Did you ever have any training in it?
No, but he says we're going to take you out on the range. I knew it was that day or the next day. He said, and we're going on the range. So okay, we go on the range, and you and me, what the heck, I was a kid and didn't know any better and whatever, and so they gave me the rockets and to shoot, so they're probably snickering up their sleeve, and so I stood up and I shot one of those. I think I went back further than the rocket did. And I paid though. My doggone whole shoulder was black and blue. I never did that again. That was once and for all. And I shot loads of them after that, but it was either the kneeling or prone. Flat on the So I learned that lesson. So
it's a painful way to have to learn.
Yeah, and we carried. I had to carry around a dozen of those around my belt, and those go off with contact. So actually, I wasn't walking. You never know. If I went down too fast and hit something solid, I wouldn't have been here. It would just I think that's what happened.
It's kind of tough if you have to duck.
Yeah, thank God, and I never had to do that fast.
So where did you go next?
Yeah, well, we were taking the outfit. They had evidently they pulled back from the casino front, the 3rd Division, my outfit, and then I think they're earmarking us to maybe go back up to the casino front again, because we're taking these big rubber boats, that inflated rubber boat, things like. Mm-hmm. We're taking those for a couple of days, the training with on those boats. I know what river that was, a little river, and then all of a sudden they changed the orders or whatever. They packed us all up, shipped us all down to just outside of Naples, and we were in pup tents down there. I remember having my little pup tent, and then we start taking amphibious training to on the LSTs, or landing ship tanks, and that went on for maybe a couple of weeks. That turned out till just about January 19th, when the actual landing was on Anzio.
So you were involved in the landing at Anzio?
Yes. But
what was that like?
Yeah, well, that was a little thing too. That on the LSTs they had suspended these. They have these large boats. They hold about 50, 60, like they would say about a platoon, about 60 guys in one boat. Well, our boat, evidently, we got as they got us far to land, the LSTs, and we got us off the boat, and then they went with the doggone engine, motor wouldn't start on our boat. So we got stranded there, and the rest of our company outfit came in to shore. So we got in at daybreak after. Remember, it was they got the engine going after, and they got us in. And I remember getting off the little boat there, and by then there wasn't much of any firing right then, but we get in about a few hundred yards or so, 400 yards maybe, and hear this plane over to the side, and I see this little black thing that was up there, you know. Turned out to be a bomb. And in the meantime, this LST had pulled it as far as it could to shore. That's where they do until they come to the beach, and then they have the whole front of the ship comes down, and it's a ramp, so for the tanks or trucks or anything you want to unload. So here this truck was coming about halfway down the ramp. It was a bomb. It directly hit the whole front of that ship. And I looked at just the corner of my eye, and it's that truck was just like a matchbox. The guy that was driving it, he was gone. So they just, and luckily the shrapnel and stuff didn't reach us, but it threw me off the off the ground, blew off the ground and stuff, concussion and stuff. So I figured, well, this is it. This is war. You know, that was it. So then we went up. Too far. We caught up with our company. I remember catch company, and I was on the right hand side of the road, and it was little houses that the Italian people had, nice little houses with plank and stuff. And I remember the men come running out there, and they're howling, Tedeschi, you know, like pulling up the road, like you know, the Germans are the enemy, you know. And so this is what this fella in my squad there is Zimmer Hazel. I remember his name. He buddied up with me. So we both practically crawled across the road, and we went over to the other side. But where those Italian guys are waving, come on over, you know. So they're so doggone happy to see us and stuff like that, the Americans, you know. And so come on in, you know, open up the door, come on in the house, you can mangia, you know, they got food for us, and I'm looking there, the whole place was just spread with, and the women were there, all so happy to see us, and I'd say, oh my God, you know, here, they were, you know, the Italians were enemies with us, you know,
sure,
you know, stuff in Germany, so, and they're so happy to see the Americans. Boy, that was a big morale builder right there. I said, hey boy, you know, we're gonna roll up our sleeves now, you know, so we kind of, you know, we didn't want to, because, you know, we're in a war, you know, they sit down and eat, you know, so then we says no, we kind of, you know, brushed off. So I remember one of them says, Dino, he said, come on down. He said, you got to come on downstairs, down in the cellar. They got wine, you know, barrels of wine. So we went down out there and looked. Oh my God, yeah, they did have barrels of wine out there, but no, we didn't. But you know, I always wondered what happened to those poor people there, though, because after that, all hell broke loose. All hell broke loose. It wasn't only just the small arms, you know. burp guns and machine guns of the Germans, but the 88s and all that stuff come flying at you. You know, you hear the things coming over your head. When you hear them hard, you know the damn things were going over you. But there was, you got used to it. But when it went like a suction thing, you better start taking cover and crawl, and just hope to God it doesn't hit you directly, because that baby's coming right in at you, you know. So that's how you learn quick, you know. And, so that was. After that, I lost contact too with my friend Zimmer Hazel. I always wondered what happened to him too. If he ever made it, or if he got nailed just that day, or you know. But, and it was a complete chaos after the rest after that. Just that night he had us, our lieutenant had us shipped around at least 4 or 5 times through the night. Every time he kind of wanted to get some rest, no, we got to move out, you know, because they got the orders, I guess, on what was going on. We didn't realize, but what they were doing. But you know, all you could see is these the poor towns. They had their haystacks, and they were all burning from the the shells hitting them and stuff like that. It was you name it. It was really going on. Yeah, it was real. So, but then it settled down, and you know, after that kind of settled down. When we, there was all your little sporadic fire and stuff like that, and shell coming on and stuff like that.
Where were you when you got the citation for bravery? Yeah,
well, that's it. Like I say, we kind of coasted. I'd say, you get harassed and stuff like that. But I remember putting up trying to put up barbed wire and stuff like that. For us and things, and helping out and stuff, volunteering with certain things for defense and stuff. But that wound up to about almost about a month, because about the 18th of 17th, 18th of February.
You're just fighting in that area, trying to break out of there. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, I think there were. It was the 19th of February that we. They started out in the morning. You knew, like they put up a smoke screens, with bombs, that smoke bombs, and we knew we came down to this what come to find out right where the Germans were entrenched, like, and with machine guns to fortify their mortars and stuff. And they had it. I remember they had it strung with the barbed wire. And the guys, they were again, they didn't pay attention and stuff. Just walking around there, you had no. The ones that just stood up and tried to get through the barbed wire, just standing up and stuff like that, they just tore them right in two with them, because the machine guns were set right through, evidently, I think, Yeah. So I crawled underneath the barbed wire to get out, to get through, and made it. But so and we were pinned down there for.
This might be a good time for me to read the citation for the award of the Distinguished Service Cross. John A. Kostrisak, Sergeant, then Private First Class, Infantry Company E, 30th Infantry Regiment, for extraordinary heroism in action. At 0800 hours on 18 February 1944, near Paglione, Italy, during a task force thrust against the exposed flanks of an enemy salient which had penetrated deep into the perimeter of the Anzio beachhead, Sergeant Kostrisak braved the intense fire of an enemy stronghold in order to destroy an enemy machine gun. When his company was halted on bare, level ground by intense fire from an enemy-held position, Sergeant Kostrisak took his rifle and grenade launcher and rushed 125 yards toward the defilated enemy. Dropping to one knee, he fired 3 grenades into the machine gun nest, silencing the gun and wounding the 2-man crew. This single-handed assault stunned the supporting enemy rifle elements, who promptly surrendered. The advance was resumed, but the company was again stopped under similar conditions by a far larger enemy force consisting of a heavy machine gun and numerous riflemen, while the remainder of his squad hugged the ground in an unsuccessful effort to escape the lethal hostile fire. Sergeant Kostrisak, unmindful of the bullets which barely missed him, rose to a kneeling position and fired rifle grenades into the defilated strongpoint. After he had killed 4 Germans and knocked out the heavy machine gun, 24 enemy infantrymen surrendered. At about noon, when his company advanced towards a fringe of woods, it was subjected to a heavy artillery concentration and direct fire from the 77mm gun and machine guns of a Mark IV tank. Although his company commander was killed and others fell dead and wounded around him, Sergeant Kostrisak rushed forward 300 yards in a one-man assault on the tank. Scoring 2 direct hits on the armored vehicle, he forced it to limp into the woods, where the crew abandoned it. Displaying an audacity and scorn of danger seldom surpassed, Sergeant Kostrisak had made 3 single-handed assaults on strong enemy forces. He had defeated each of these forces, killing 4, wounding at least 2, and causing the capture of 30 of the enemy. He had prevented his company, which suffered 93 casualties that day, from being completely decimated, and had 3 times enabled it to resume its advance on its objective. Entered military service from Collinsville, Connecticut. That's quite a story.
It was for today.
Is there anything else you want to say about that particular incident?
No, that was...
that pretty much covers it for you.
Pretty much, yeah. It was not that,
Now, you were wounded during the war.
yeah. I was wounded right after that.
Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, then we were on another attack and pinned down, like I said, and stuff. And I can remember the squad leader next to me. He got up to one day and he got hit by a sniper. And then we after lying there for it seemed like ages, because we really pinned down. If you just moved a little bit, they'd knock you off like that. His name was Gramsci. So finally, the things slowed down a little bit, and there was like the shoulder, a bed along the road that we moved over into that, and then they started throwing some real heavy stuff at us. I don't know if it was mortars or whatever, and that's when I got hit. It was we were right up there, and that one shell, it got me, but it got the guy, a couple of guys in front of me. They just tore them right apart. They were just completely done. So
And how were you wounded? How badly were you wounded?
yeah, that was it. I got hit on the side, my shoulder and stuff, and I was saving my canteen of water. You know, you carry a canteen of water on your belt, I figured, well, we'll save it till when I need some water. So just about then I needed some water. So I reached out there. The canteen was completely, that part was just fake there too. It just the shrapnel just tore it. There was nothing left of the canteen. In other words, if that canteen wasn't there, I'd had a lot more sustained, a lot more wounds. That saved some wounds. So I really got hit on my shoulder. My arm was never the same. My shoulder. So then they got to the evacuation. They got me to the evacuation. The guys coming. Well, the guys at the back. The guys in the back. They come in and they're following through. I guess they got me to the evacuation hospital, and then from there I went to into Naples. At the general hospital here. I remember I was on the second floor there, and just at that time, that was in March of 44, Mount Vesuvius erupted.
Oh wow!
Yes. So right from my I had a nice beautiful picture one day, from where I was laying there, and I could see it at night how the lobby was erupting. The big veins of lava coming down. That Pompeii years ago was completely covered. So this just happened that it was erupting then. So during the day it was completely with the smoke and stuff. You can see, like really dense. But at night it was really clear, Vesuvius. And then about 2 weeks after I was in there, I was recuperating from the wounds and stuff. We got bombed. The hospital got bombed because we lost our they said that the furnace, the boiler room and stuff got bombed. I know that we heard them, the bombs coming and stuff. We don't know exactly where. That's what actually happened. They actually bombed the hospital. I know that night like that. Whatever it's so how it seems.
So did you have to be evacuated from the hospital too?
No, it wasn't enough to be evacuated, but it was. We lost that we only had cold water, and there was cold. Luckily, it's not that freezing down there anyway, so we bear with it. So then I got out of there and joined the outfit again, and that was that had to be in April, the end of April, and they set us up. They had pulled back my outfit and reset, set us up, and then that was going to be the breakthrough. What turned out to be the breakthrough of Anzio, where they had it the way I understood what they were saying, and how it's going to function was in our battalion. You have the E, F, and G, Easy, Fox, and George, rifle companies, and H was a heavy weapon. So they said that George is going to go first, go as far as he can. And then F ours. It was unbelievable. We got through it. Got through the after, but going through the all your buddies, you know.
So
So-
were many of your
So,
company
so,
killed?
we finally got through George company, and that company were completely not annihilated us. They just about, you know, things. And we got to this opening there, and come to find out that's where they were set up, the Germans. Well, I call them enemies, not Germans, because we get into that. So. Come to find out they had big trenches in the back part of the field as you come in there. And then on the sides they had some foxholes and stuff. And so we got to that opening, and it was either us or them, so, you know. So we got the orders. So we all made a line. And this was it. We're going right at them, full force. But well, we didn't, you know, didn't kill them. Well, then they surrendered after. We just overran them because, you know, between us shooting and then you know, we overran them. So that was the end of that part of it right then. So there was a little hill on a little knoll on the side. I saw a foxhole there, you know, foxholes they had there. So I hopped into that. And it was that was the only time I ever cried. It was so I was crying, and platoon, the lieutenant come crawling over to me, and he says, go on back. He says, you're going back, you know. So I said, no. So then I saw the trenches on the road to get more covered, because I figured that, well, this is going to, I could just sense that something's going to happen, you know, because that's not the end of it, you know. We got the initial forces, the machine guns and mortars that were right there that were supposedly holding the line, but they had their big stuff in the back, you know. So I hopped out of the foxhole after that, and jumped from the trenches. So I figured, hey, they're coming. It's coming from that end there. We're right up against the trench. There again, just pure instinct and whatever you think about, you know, what you're trained about to do, you know, circumstances. So I hopped up against the thing there, the trenches, and really buried myself as much as I could, and the stuff coming in. It was coming in. And I turned around, and the guys that were on the other end of the trench, they were gone. So it just, luckily I survived that. Then it cooled off, and I hopped out and get the heck out of that area to try to go. And then we reorganized and stuff. And that day there too, I don't know, they said at the end of the day there was only about 25 of us left on the company. The whole company, the rest were Yeah, that was actually when we went into Rome. That's just about when they had the Normandy landing up in northern France, and we got into Rome without any resistance in there. They seemed to bypass that and everything. But I and one of the other fellows in the office were designated to ride in a Jeep. The Jeep driver, three of us, in an open Jeep, and we could have been by snipers or anything. We were just sitting duck there anyway, but we patrolled Rome. I could remember going down into St. Peter, right to St. Peter's Square, but naturally the Vatican was off. That thing, they had it blocked off, and so. But I can remember that was a big thing for me to see that. But gosh,
get to see the Colosseum, all the sights and Rome.
Yeah. So we were there for a few days at least. So it was not more than a week. And then we pulled back, say just about the exact spot where I had my pup tent before for amphibious training again. Huh. And but this time we were taking training for LCIs. That's the landing craft infantry, they call it. They held about 300 guys or something, like 300 guys, and that was until I guess it was August that we went into southern France, and going into there, it was you didn't the LCIs they're a ship that went as far as they could up against the beach, and then they had the catwalk, you could say, on each side, and then the stairs where you walked up into what was any water. And you didn't know because naturally the beaches aren't all manicured, so
sure.
you could be maybe about a little over your ankles, so over your head.
Uh-huh.
So that's a chance you took, So I know some of the guys got drowned or not on that, But luckily I got off of there all right, and I could remember it was a complete. The noise was unbelievable. I thought the earth was going to split in two. It was between the bombs, their bombs. They had these, the Navy had these rocket boats, I guess they're called, that were shooting, anything from about 20, maybe about 30 to 50 rockets at a time or more, I don't know. They're coming overhead. There were several of those that, between those coming in, and the bombs, and whatever, all the other stuff going on. It was in the trees that were all burning there and everything. It was a complete chaos, coming in. But we didn't have any on our part. What we came, we didn't have much of any resistance at all. Right on the beach. But after we got off and organized, and we went up, and they had paved roads in France. It was like here, We got on the road, and we let's say about an hour up on our road. We came around this bend and on a big straightaway, and come to find out, over to the left, there was a little hill there, and that's where they were entrenched. The Germans were just waiting for us to come around, and as we got enough guys in there, supposedly, I guess, and they really let us have it. All of a sudden, it just, all hell broke loose, and I couldn't remember. Just went over the shoulder, and then I looked, I saw that it was a little too far for me to really get to the, like, to where it's coming to their dugouts there. But I did the best I could, and I shot several grenades. I saw when they exploded, they were about 3/4 of the way up, but it was enough to kind of harass them, let them know that. And then I heard some tanks came around. A couple of tanks came around the corner. And then they plastered the heck out of that hill there. And what was left there, there was about, I'd say about 8 or 10 Germans, enemy come down with white handkerchiefs and comrade, comrade. That was the end of that thing. But in the meantime, though, as they were firing their evidently mortars, and every time a mortar would hit, you could hear some of the medics or whatever, screaming and stuff like that. They were actually hitting us, But luckily, it didn't get me. I survived that. So we from there we just went. There wasn't much real resistance after that. So we're going as fast as we could march, between marching, and then they'd give us a break and throw us on the trucks, and then we'd go a little bit, then drop off, get the others a break. But they had a system, I guess, of getting us going through. So that was the figure that night, and that I didn't sleep. We didn't sleep. The next day we were doing this, going as fast as we could, and that night, and then we're 2 days left, and that we're going to the third night that we haven't slept or anything, and just going as much as we could.
Wow.
And we're right outside of Brignoles, France. It's a good sized town, or a small city, I'd say. And we're on the outskirts of it, and so we got orders that 2 guys, we set a line outside of so we could try to get some sleep, because we're completely exhausted. 2 guys sleep and 1 guy watch. I can remember doing my part, but then it was my turn to sleep. I was sleeping, and the thing that saved me that day was dark as an ace of spades out. All of a sudden, I hear somebody tripped over me. He was an enemy soldier, German soldier. Kind of swearing in German. And so I jumped and stuff, and he was more scared than I guess, because what the heck he tripped on, And so everything just blew up, the whole, because it wasn't only he tripped on me, but others that did the same thing, and holy cow, it was a real war then, for a little while, and So next thing is daybreak, and we, so I can remember standing on the side of the road there, and there was at least a couple hundred Germans that we captured then. It must have been a whole like company, or at least or maybe battalion that would have come down through. You know,
So they were trying to get out?
No, that we actually captured. That they just gave up though, because like I say, we were, you know, we were right in combat with them, but it was pitch dark then. You know, you couldn't even see what you're doing. What was going on? Everybody was confused. It was complete mess. But I could remember that specifically that well, I say enemy, you know, enemy soldier tripped over me. You know, that's what saved me that day. And so after that, we organized and we went into Big Nose and did the street fighting. We were going into, I can remember going into it was kind of, it was this garage there in Big Nose, and I was amazed that, you know, they had all machinery, like a machine shop and everything in the garage, you know, like, and that was in my field. I was studying to be an auto technician and stuff, you know, so.
You wanted to check out the garage.
Yeah, check out the garage. Yeah, see, that was interesting. See, yeah, so, see, that was one point in Big Nose, I can remember, yeah. So, we cleaned out of there, and then we went up to, we wound up